Hey guys, like and subscribe for more content. Hopefully enjoy the tech support videos that are coming. Hey guys. So in today's video, I'm going to walk you through how to upgrade your Windows 10 machine to a Linux machine. And I say upgrade because we're coming on to the time when you're going to be required by Microsoft to replace your hardware in order to run Windows 11. Now specifically, this is for all the people that are running 7th gen Intels or older on their primary desktop. Now, I know that your primary desktop at this point is probably Windows 10. Some of you may also still be running Windows 7. If you're running 7 or if you're running 10, it really doesn't make any difference at this point, or 8 or 8.1, but you still have older hardware. Assuming you don't do a lot of gaming, a good solution is to run Linux. Now, I say that because in reality, the vast majority of people who use a computer, they don't really need the ability to run high-end games. And if you're running a 7th gen processor, let's face it, you're probably not running high-end games anyway. But maybe you want to go on the internet. Maybe you want to use a browser without a major issue. Maybe you do have some concerns over security. Maybe your system's getting a little slow from all the updates and the usage. Maybe you just want to give it a nice quick tune-up with the ability to get online. Maybe write a paper using LibreOffice or OpenOffice. Maybe you want to run virtualization, but you don't have the ability to run all this high-end stuff because you just don't have the money to buy a machine. I think Linux is a great option for you, especially if you're an older person and maybe you just want to use your machine securely to access, a retirement package or your bank account information, and you're concerned that your Windows operating system at this point is a couple years out of date. Hasn't been updated, you're not running the latest versions of antivirus, and you're a little worried as to whether or not you're having issues. So I'm going to show you a couple things in this video. I'm going to show you, first of all, specifically how to create a mounted ISO files, how to put an ISO file or the actual operating system, the installation process onto a USB thumb drive, and then how to take that thumb drive and boot off of it in a common machine, whether it's Dell or HP, Lenovo, Acer, MSI. Any of those systems will really be about the same as far as your boot process to actually boot off the thumb drive and install the operating system. And then I'm going to walk you through how to install a Linux operating system on your desktop, how to do the configuration, how to get it up to date, how to install some basic packages, and how to create a daily driver that you could use as a replacement for Windows. Again, assuming you don't do heavy-duty gaming. Now, if you do some gaming, it's okay. What you could do is you could log into your Steam account on your Windows system and check to see if the games that you purchased are supported by either the Steam Deck, Steam OS, or Linux itself. And if it is, then you can install the Steam application on your Linux system, and we'll go through that as well on how to get that to work on your Linux operating system. Now, for this video, I'm going to choose to use Linux Mint. And there's a reason for that. And specifically, the reason is driver support. Now, Ubuntu, which is what Mint is really kind of based off of, has a newer kernel version or a newer build version at 24. Mint is still on 22. However, you can update to the latest kernel build version in Mint and basically get the same functions and features that you get out of the latest version of Ubuntu. However, you could retain all of the driver support for things like an NVIDIA card or an AMD chipset card or ATI cards, things that have older hardware support. And usually, don't quote me on it, but usually most video cards going back to about 2007 should work fine on Linux Mint 22. So if you have a video card from circa 2007, 2008, and you know at this point it's pretty long in tooth as far as replacement requirement is, it shouldn't matter. You should be able to run that without any major issue. Okay, so as usual, these videos are filmed in VMware using VMware Workstation. However, VMware Workstation is handy in that when I create these videos, I can actually do things on these videos as if I was on a desktop. So there shouldn't be any difference from ripping it to a USB drive from our VM running Windows 10 system versus your home version of Windows 10 or your physical hardware Windows 10. Now, I chose to do this on Windows 10 specifically for the fact that it's not going to be any different, first of all, on Windows 11. But the reason why I chose Windows 10 is because, again, Windows 11 becomes our primary OS in April. If there's anybody out there like me who does not like Windows 11, but does want modern security, or at least updated security functions, features, the ability to browse the internet without having major issues, and all the driver issues that go along with Windows 11, believe it or not, at this point, Linux is more stable. It has a lot less driver issues than Windows 11 has. And at least from a usability standpoint, it'll keep your older hardware reliable and relevant for probably another 5 or 6 years. Now, obviously, upgrading stuff, especially now that the prices of these systems will become boat-anchored nothing. I mean, honestly, a 7th gen, once we get into like March, you could probably pick those things up for $100. So for a $99 desktop that you could use as a daily driver that gives you the security of Linux as well as the functionality of a modern OS, I mean, you know, you can't get much better than that. I mean, even a cell phone will cost you more than a old 7th gen desktop at that point. Now, if you're running a 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st gen, honestly, you could still do this, but I would wait until March and just spend the $99 and buy the 7th gen i7 processor with 32 gigs of memory and a 512 solid state drive, because at that point those machines are really worth nothing, because businesses aren't going to be able to upgrade them to Windows 11. They don't really run Windows 11 natively. They don't have the native upgraded version of the Trusted Platform module, the TPM support, so they're pretty much worthless. So if you get one of those machines cheap enough, they make great lab machines, or they make great Linux daily drivers. Now, I say a great lab machine because just because the operating system of Windows 11 won't run on a 7th gen processor doesn't mean that you can't run Server 2022 or Server 2025. You can, because those operating systems don't require that Trusted Platform module. They don't require the upgraded hardware in order to run. They will run. They also don't require the updated drivers for your video card. They will run on the generic Intel driver or the generic AMD driver, whatever Microsoft provides. So you really don't need new hardware if you're going to run a server OS. And again, with the rearm, you can get away with running them for about 3 years. So as long as you do a reformat every 3 years, you could technically run one of those OSs for 3 years indefinitely. But with that said, if you're just looking for something that you could use as a daily, that's secure, that works, that has most of the functions that you're going to need or require, at least from a daily driver, Linux is still my go-to and my suggestion. And that's coming from somebody that has, at this point, probably closing in on 30 years of Microsoft systems engineering and systems administration experience. You really don't need Windows in order to run as a daily driver at home. 90% of the stuff you could do on Linux at this point, and 90% of those things that work on Linux work better than they did on Microsoft to begin with. So let's dig into this video. Let's jump through. Let's take a look. Let's do a full build from ripping the thing to a USB drive, booting off the USB drive, and then going through the installation process of our actual Linux system, all the updates, the packages, and all that other fun stuff. And then let's end it out and, see if, anybody wants to throw something in the comments. I'd be really interested in knowing, are you going to upgrade to Windows 11 since we're now in 2025 and April is the deadline? Are you replacing your hardware and going to Windows 11? Or are you going to jump the ship and go over to Linux and at least give it a try? I would implore you to actually try it, just because I think the vast majority of people, maybe not everybody, but the vast majority of people, especially those people that say, oh, I'm not going to buy another Windows system, I'm going to go to a Mac, just go to Linux. It'll save you a ton of money, and it does the same thing. So let's jump in. Okay, so I've already downloaded our configuration here for our Rufus, but you'll specifically have to go to the web and look for Rufus. It's just RUFUS. And you're going to also have to go to the web and download the ISO file for Linux, specifically for Mint, if that's what you choose to do. If you want to use Ubuntu, that's totally fine too. If you go to the wiki, you'll have the links for both of those things, for the direct downloads for both operating systems. You'll also have in the wiki the direct download for the Rufus, so you could grab it from there if you're not sure where to go specifically to grab those files. So once you have them downloaded, you're just going to double click on this thing. You're going to click yes for the UAC if you're on Windows 10. You'll notice on this particular system, we are connected to the internet. The reason why is because when we go through this process, this application is going to download additional files in order to mount this correctly, because we're using a Linux ISO file to mount. If it was Windows, chances are the Windows files would just work, but in Linux, it requires an additional download for the format configuration. So what we're going to do here is we're going to confirm that this is the drive we want to use, and we could do that two ways. Number one, you could see it here. This is the E drive, new USB. Honestly, it could be named anything. It could be any drive letter. It depends on what you have configured on your home system. If you need to confirm it, you could right-click on Start. You could go to Disk Management. And then under Disk Management, you're going to see Disk 1 here, at least for mine, is 7.22 gig. So that's an 8 gig external hard drive. You'll see new USB. You'll see it's a FAT32 partition. So that tells me straight away that's the drive I'm looking for. Now, if you have a concern with that, unplug everything that's USB, hard drive, or external drive from your system, and only plug in the thumb drive that you want to use to mount the ISO file. And then at that point, that's the only thing that's going to show up. Once you've confirmed that that's the drive you want to use, we're going to select the ISO file. So we'll just choose Select. We'll navigate to the path where the actual file exists. In this particular case, we're looking at the Tools directory. We'll grab that. We'll choose Open. Great. So now we have this configured where we have an MBR partition. We're using BIOS or UEFI. We have FAT32. We have the default cluster size. We know that this is Linux Mint. You can see the ISO file. It's going to the 7.7 gig USB drive. We're going to choose Start. We're going to choose the default, which is the recommended. We're going to choose OK. And we're going to notification about a download requirement. We're going to choose Yes. So it tells me now that it's going to destroy all the data on this USB drive. We're going to say OK. And we're going to see that it's going to delete the partition and then reconfigure the partition and mount the ISO file, so that way we can actually access the application and boot off it on our Linux box. So once this completes, we'll pick up the video on the Linux side. Okay, so we're booting off of the Linux Mint ISO file at this point. Now, if you're running OEM hardware, whether it's a Dell or an HP or Lenovo, all you'd have to do is hit F12 on your keyboard to boot off the thumb drive. So you just reboot the system, plug the thumb drive in, hit F12. The system would then take the F12 keystroke. It's going to notify you to boot off the thumb drive. You'll choose Yes, and you'll boot off the ISO file that's mounted to the thumb drive, and you'll get this as your splash screen if you're installing Linux Mint. Now, two things I want to point out in this. Number one, you have to back up all of your data off of your Windows system before you do this, or replace the hard drive. So that way you could have a copy of your backup files, because doing this will wipe all of the files. Or B, or number two, what you could do is you actually boot this as a live CD or a live operating system just to try it out first. And you could run through the full configuration in trial mode. However, it's not going to retain the settings once you shut the system off. So you could restart it, it'll come back up, it'll be fine, but you can't shut the system off. Once you shut it off, it'll wipe all the configuration. Now, in some configurations, you could choose in this options menu the OEM install for manufacturers. So for instance, if you have like a Dell Vostro machine that was also sold in another country, you could choose the OEM install, and it'll do an OEM install and image the system just like it would have came out of the box for a Dell Vostro out of, like Europe. In the US, we don't really get that option for Linux pre-built or homegrown machines that are come from the manufacturer. Dell did it for a while, but I don't think they're doing it anymore. At least not that I've been able to find, because those machines were great. They were a bargain. You could pick up a Linux brand new machine for like $300, and you get an i5 processor and 16 gigs of memory. The vast majority of the pricing that goes into these Dell machines is usually the Microsoft licensing, because it's $200 in itself. So when you buy an OEM machine that came with preloaded Linux, some of them, again, I've seen them as low as like $200, $199 for a brand new machine in an i5 configuration. I've seen i3 configurations in a brand new machine for $150, $149 that came preloaded with Ubuntu or Linux Mint. So, there are bargain machines out there if you need a new piece of hardware and you don't care that it doesn't have the Windows licensing. But the Windows licensing is what usually gets you as far as the price configuration is concerned. So at least in this configuration, since we've theoretically, now I'm doing air quotes here because this is a new system in the sake of a new system. It's not replacing the Windows 10 machine. But if you were to do that, what you would do is you would just do the install. And we'll go through the installation process. However, on this particular system, we're just going to install it as a fresh build, assuming that maybe we just replace the hard drive on our 7th gen Intel i5 or i7 processor. So, and again, it's not saying that the i3 won't work. It will. It's just that, generally speaking, anybody that's following this channel, don't buy an i3 processor. You'd be better off buying last year's i5 than this year's i3. They're usually crap. They're obviously better than a Celeron, but that's arguable because they're the bargain chip, and it's not really a bargain because you're going to pay maybe $5.99 for the bargain i3 versus $6.29 for the i5. And for $30, $31, whatever it is, you'd be better off with the i5. It'll last longer. It'll get better use out of it. It'll just be all around a better chip. So if you're going to buy an Intel chip, buy an i5 and an i7. If you're going to go AMD, then Ryzen 5 or Ryzen 7. If you could afford it, a Threadripper. Yeah, we could all wish, right? So let's do Start Linux Mint. Okay, guys, so Linux just came up. Now, for those who are new to this operating system, it's a new platform for you. This would probably be the first time you're seeing it. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown as to what to expect. Now, obviously, we're in a picture box format right now. Once we have this installed, it would install all the graphics drivers. But when you do the initial off the USB, it comes with the generic driver configuration for you to just use it in a generic sense. Basically, the ability to test drive it before you decide whether or not you want to use the operating system. So this particular version is the Cinnamon version. Now the Cinnamon version versus Mate versus the KDC versus GNOME, they're all going to be different desktop configurations, but I like the Cinnamon version on Linux Mint. It's probably the closest thing we're going to find to our Windows systems, where we have a start button on the bottom left-hand side. And we have all the options for applications and accessories and internet connection, and it comes pre-built with an Office application. We do have the ability to play videos and things. We could still install like VLC player if we want at a later point. We have all the preference configurations here, so we could go in here and we could change the way things look or how it acts or the colors or whatever else. And it comes pre-built with Firefox web browser built into it. We do have a command line in the terminal. We do have a file or a folder file explorer like Microsoft File Explorer. It's pretty much the same thing. And we have our documents and music and pictures, videos. We have a downloads folder. We have the file system location. And we can see right now, based off of what we're running, this is an 8 gig thumb drive. It's roughly about 4 gigs installed as far as the operating system off of a live disk. And it's probably closer to 6 gigs once it's installed on a physical drive, so it's not all that big. Once we get all the updates installed, then it's a different story. But as it sits right now, it's really not that big. And the nicest thing about it is it's stable. One of the things that I find with it is that even if you do have a situation where it says locks up or freezes, if you hard boot it and it comes back up, it doesn't bark with having to do a defrag or a check disk or anything else. It just works. So it's kind of nice like that. So at this point, we're going to do an install, which on this is a lot easier than Windows, or at least I think so, especially on Windows 11. Windows 11 has gotten very convoluted. You need an account. You need to have a Microsoft account. If you buy a home version, you can't install it local. You need an internet connection. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I'm going to walk you through how to do an install on Linux Mint because it's pretty simple and straightforward. Again, we're going to assume we're going to format the entire hard drive. I'm not going to create customized partitions on this. There's really no reason to do that. We could adjust the page file later if we really want to, or the swap file as it exists inside of a Linux. But for the most part, most systems are probably going to have enough physical RAM that we don't have to mess with that. If you're running like 4 gigs of memory, then obviously you might want to mess with it. If you're running 8 gigs of memory, you should be totally fine without screwing with anything. And I would imagine that the vast majority of you guys out there, if you're running Windows 10 machines that are like 7th or 6th gen processors, even 5th gen processors, you probably have 8 gigs of RAM at least. if not 6, which again is totally fine. If you're at 4, then we would have to adjust the page file, or the swap file rather. Now keep in mind, it doesn't work the same in Windows. Windows has the page, Linux has a swap file. Linux is a flat file system. It's not an active file system like Windows is, so it's not constantly writing there. And the way Linux works is it will always write to the memory RAM first before it tries to do a swap file, whereas with Windows, it will always write to the page file first before it writes to RAM, and then swap it between the RAM. It's kind of Achilles heel situation, where in Windows you could have like 64 gigs of memory, but you may not get the performance that you're going to get out of having 16 gigs of memory just because of the way the page file works. So let's do the install. So on this particular system, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is where it says install Linux Mint, we're going to double click on the disk. You're going to see the little thing that pops up, that little circle with the colors on it. And that just means that the system's thinking it's loading. Once it gets past that, we'll get to the splash screen where we could do the installation. So for this system, we're going to choose English because that's what I speak, and I've already gone through the Chinese version of Windows 10 and don't want to relive that in Linux. So we're going to choose English US. We're going to choose Continue. Now obviously, if you speak English UK, you could choose that, or any of the other languages in here. If you're translating this, you could choose those and then click on Continue. We're going to get a notification that we can install multimedia codecs. We're not going to do that. We don't have a reason to, because again, we can install this stuff later, or we can install the VLC player, which comes with all that stuff anyway. So we're just going to click on Continue. Okay, so this is where we can make changes to our configuration of our disk settings. So if we go into advanced features, we'll get advanced settings. We could choose something else. There's really no reason. For the sake of this video, again, we're just assuming we're going to replace a desktop that's running Windows 10 when it end of life's with Linux. We're just going to choose to erase the entire disk and install Linux, and choose Install Now. And you're going to notice that you're going to get a notification. And the reason why you're getting this notification is because once this thing formats the drive, anything that you had on Windows that you didn't back up is gone. Now, obviously, there are ways to recover, but for the sake of comments, I know somebody will write down there, oh, you could do this and that. Yeah, you could do a lot of those things, but chances are, if you have a 7th gen, you're just trying to go to Linux, so that way you don't have to buy a Windows 11 machine and spend $1,000 on something. Or more, this is probably just enough information to tell you that you're going to lose your data once you click on Continue. So again, either use a different hard drive or make sure you have a backup of that system, that Windows 10 system, before you go through it. And we're just going to click on Continue. We're going to choose a region. So we're going to choose New York. Okay, so we're going to put in a name. We're going to choose Frankie for the name. We're going to choose the system's name as Mint System. We're going to pick a username as Frank. Now, the computer name and the username should be lowercase. Case sensitivity exists in Linux. It doesn't exist in Windows. You can make your username, capital, lowercase, capital, lowercase, capital, lowercase. It makes no difference, because then when you go to log in, you can use all lowercase, all capital, and the system doesn't care. But in Linux, it does. So you want to make sure that you use your system name as well as your username in all lowercase. Then you're going to choose a password. This system's going to tell you whether or not the password's strong. So if your password sucks, it'll tell you straight out on here, unlike Windows. Then you're going to click to require password to log in. You don't want to choose the login automatically, because if you forget what the password is, you won't be able to update the system. So don't do that. Just require the password to log in. And then you could choose to encrypt your home folder. I would suggest you do that if you're not going to run virtualization. If you're going to run virtualization, I would suggest not doing that, because it'll save you a step in having to create a decryption key in order to run the virtualization process. It's a whole big thing. So for the sake of ease of access or configuration, I would just choose not to encrypt my home folder. However, you can make that choice later in the operating system if you want to, or you could do it now and then just create the decryption key. That's entirely up to you. For the sake of this machine, I'm going to not encrypt my home folder, and I'm going to choose Continue. Now you're going to notice that it's going to say almost finished copying files, even though you just click the Continue button. The reason why is because the system starts the installation process even though you haven't clicked Continue, even though you haven't set a name, even though you haven't set a password. It's doing it in the background, so that way it could speed up the process. So that way you don't have to wait or start at the beginning of the copy of files when you're doing the installation after you click the continue button. Okay, so once the thing finishes during the installation, it will bring you to this screen, which specifically will give you the option to either continue testing using the thumb drive as your booted operating system or restart now. Now, if you hit restart now, it'll eventually prompt you to remove the thumb drive. So you remove that, you'll hit enter, and the system will reboot itself. And when it comes back up, it's going to load directly into the Linux operating system. So let's click restart now. So there, you see where it says remove the installation media and press enter. So at this point, you'll pull the thumb drive and hit enter on the keyboard, and the system will continue to reboot and log back into Linux Mint as a fresh operating system for the first time. So it's common for you to see a couple of errors on reboot after you pull the thumb drive and you hit the enter button. And those are generally because it can't write the data any longer to the thumb drive, so that's normal. Once you get to the logon screen, when you first log into the system or first boot up to the system, you should see this screen. So what you're going to do is you're going to type in your password that you just set, and you're going to hit the little arrow button to log in for the first time. Okay, so once we log into the system, we're going to get this box on the screen here. And this is going to give us a couple first steps that we could run on the system. Whether it's, configuration things, so firewall controls, system settings, etc. Documentation, like if we want to learn how certain things work. We have help, including a chat room where we could go and actually chat with people that actually know about this operating system that may be able to help you figure it out. Or we could contribute to the actual project here, which, again, because this is open source, they take contributions in order to run the operating system or develop the OS. We're not going to do any of these things. What we're going to do is we're going to uncheck the show this dialog box at startup and then close this out. Now, again, we're in Letterbox still. The reason why is because I don't really want to go through the process of installing the VMware tools on this thing to get full screen. But when you install the system on your system, especially running Dell or HP or Lenovo, it'll just install the drivers for the video card. I'll be honest, even on my custom built system, I have a 4090 RTX, and it installed the NVIDIA drivers without having to do anything. It literally just did it on the installation process, as long as you have a network connection. So let's do some maintenance on the system first to get us prepared to do the installation of our software. Now, generally speaking, I would tell you, let's use the GUI, but because Linux is so simple with updates and upgrade, let's just use the terminal. So we're going to launch the terminal. We're going to get here, which is going to give us some information for the first configuration. We're going to use the sudo get apt update command line in order to update the system applications first. So the first thing we're going to run here is sudo apt-get update. Once I hit enter, it's going to prompt us for the password of the system. So we'll hit enter. And then we'll hit enter again. And what this is going to do is this is going to download all the updated repository details and configuration information for your applications. It'll also update the applications themselves to the latest version, but it doesn't upgrade them. So in other words, if you're on like 3.5.0 and 3.5.9 exists, it'll update it to 3.5.9. There's a separate command called sudo apt-get upgrade, which will say, all right, well, if it's 3.5.9, but I really want the latest version, which is 5.7.9, and I run that command, it'll download the latest version, the latest build version of that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hit the up arrow. We're going to change update to upgrade. And then we're going to do space -y. Now, if you don't do -y, it'll just prompt you whether or not to hit yes or no during the installation process. If you do -y, it just you're basically telling it to assume yes, you want to update this, don't notify me. So we'll just hit enter. And there you go. Now it's going to upgrade everything to the latest build version on the actual Linux operating system. This is basically the equivalent of like the 23H2 to 24H2 service pack or rollups that Microsoft does. It basically does the same thing just through a command logic. Now this may take some time depending on your hardware. It could be fast, it could be slow. It also depends on your internet connection. If your connection, like mine, is not the greatest thing out there, It'll take some time to upgrade it or update it to the latest version. And once it finishes, we'll do the update command again just to make sure that it got everything, and then we'll reboot the system. And when the system comes back up, we're going to go into the GUI and we're going to check to see if we have the latest kernel and all that other information on here. And once we have everything up to date, then we'll go through some of the process to do some installs. Okay, so once that finishes, we're going to just do the up arrow again. We're going to do update and hit enter. Okay, so we have updated the system at this point. So now what we're going to want to do is reboot it. So you could do it one of two ways. Actually, there's multiple ways you could do it in Linux, but you could click on Start, click on Quit, and then once it's prompted, you just choose to restart. Or since you're already in here and you've already sudoed, so you're already in the sudo, so you already have the escalated command, which basically is run as administrator in Windows. What we're going to do here is we're just going to reboot it. So we'll just type in sudo reboot now. And the system will just restart itself once I hit enter. So once the system reboots and gets back to the logon screen, we're just going to log back into this thing. Once we're in, we're going to get back to the base desktop of our Linux Mint system. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on the menu or the start button. And we're going to go up here where we could do a search. And we're just going to type in update. And we'll see update manager. We'll just choose that. And this is where we're going to go in and we're going to see the update management options. We're going to choose OK. And in here, we could see that we have a kernel update. And we have a resource script update for our Linux system. So we're going to choose to install updates. And we're going to choose OK. We're going to put a password in. And we're going to choose authenticate. Now the system's going to update the kernel to the latest build version. Now, for whatever reason, and I couldn't tell you one way or another why, but if you're running Ubuntu and you run the exact same latest kernel, that kernel update removes drivers for NVIDIA, which causes problems with your video card. However, in Mint, it doesn't. So if you're running older hardware or you have older video cards or even the most like bleeding edge modern video card, Mint is a better option than Ubuntu just for that reason. If not, you're going to have to go through the whole compile configuration, re-download, and reinstall the open version of the driver in order for things to work correctly again. In which case, I would tell you, save yourself the time and just use Mint in the first place, at least until they fix that on Ubuntu. All right, so once we finish that, we're going to see reboot required. So for the sake of this, just so I can show you the second way to do this, we're just going to click on Start, choose Quit, and just click on Restart. Okay, so I'm going to log back into the system now after the reboot. We're going to notice that we are connected to the net. We're going to notice that there really isn't much of a change between one version and the next as far as the kernel is concerned. So at this point, let's do some installation of some software. So something about Linux is that while it does offer a vast amount of GUI options for software and package installs, and the vast majority of those things you're going to find on the built-in one in your Linux Mint system, Ubuntu now offers something called the Snap Store, which is not part of the Linux Mint build, but we can install that. Keep in mind that all these operating systems, whether it's Mint or Debian or Ubuntu or, God, there's so many different, there's hundreds of them out there. They're all based on a Debian package. They're all really built off Ubuntu. So they all have options that exist in one and not the other. But you could clone or hybrid or whatever and combine all these things to make one OS with all the features or functions you want. Or you could build your own and start from the Debian package and work your way up. Or even like the trimmed down version of Ubuntu and work your way up to whatever you want. For me, again, because I'm building this particular video here based off of, I guess, a home user and the ease of use with the Linux operating system, I think Mint is the best way to start. If you don't, let me know down in the comments what you would suggest. I know Parrot's pretty good too, but I think for the ease of use, all things considered, I think Mint is probably the best bet. So again, let me know in the comments. I'm curious. So let's start with what Mint does have, which is specifically our software manager. So if we click on that, it's going to generate the cache. It's going to download software. And from here, we could do searches and install things, applications, games, web browsers, tweaks, tools. All that stuff exists in this repository. Now, it will take a few minutes for it to download. It could take a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is, to download the repository for options. And you'll see once it downloads it, you're going to get a slew of options and availability in here. And all this stuff is free. If you want it, you just click on it and download it. The things that aren't free, it'll tell you off the bat whether or not it's going to cost money. It'll send you to a website to actually purchase it. But for the most part, all this stuff is free. So, I mean, if you find things that you want, like for instance, here's the Ramina. Now, Ramina is basically remote desktop. So if we want this, all we have to do is just click on install and click on continue. And once we have this installed, it may prompt us for a username and password. Some of these things are going to prompt us to authenticate, in which case we just put our password in. It's just like the run as command again in Windows. And once we have this, we can remote desktop into a Windows system. So we could RDP into it from our Linux system. One of the nice things is you can anonymously comment in here too. So if you download it and you don't like it, you can enter a comment in here and let people know that you don't like it. If you do like it, you could enter a comment in here as to what you do like about it. Some of these things, you'll see a lot of notifications about people hating the application, and you may not have the same experience. Some of them will complain and say that it's god-awful, and sometimes you'll have the same experience. So once you have it downloaded, you have a choice. You can either go to the Start menu in here, and you can look for it. And you'll see it pop up right there. Or you could choose to launch it directly from the Software Manager. And you could click back, and you could go back, and you can install something else in here if you want to. We already have Firefox installed, but you could install the later version of Firefox if you want, but Firefox already comes pre-built into these systems. You could also install things like VirtualBox. Honestly, there's a lot of options for virtualization in Linux. I actually think there's more in Linux than there are in Windows at this point, and all of them are better than VirtualBox. I think VirtualBox is just crap. I really do. I don't think it's well developed. It's buggy. It locks up. It freezes. It doesn't really give you the options that the other ones give you. I really don't think it's all that great. I think it was great when it came out, but they really haven't continued to develop it. It's pretty much the same thing it was when it was released probably 15 years ago. I will say OBS Studios, if you don't know what that is, check that out. It's dope. I actually use that. That's what we're recording this video off of right now. Okay, so what if we don't want to use the Software Manager to install stuff? What if we want to use a Snap? Now, Snap Store is a little different. That actually comes in Ubuntu, but it doesn't come in Mint. But we could install it in Mint, so let's get it installed. Now, keep in mind, all of this command logic, all the details and everything else will be in the wiki with just the line by line. You could just grab them, copy them, paste them, and install the applications directly on your Linux systems. Okay, so what I did is I created a real quick, I guess, cheat sheet, specifically on the commands that we will use to do the installation. And specifically what we'll cover in this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the Snap Store install and then probably reboot afterwards. We'll install VLC Player. We'll install Teams. We'll install Slack. We'll install Microsoft Office 0365 apps. Now keep in mind that's not a full-blown installation. It's basically a shortcut configuration to get to the online apps only that has been developed specifically for Debian-based packages, so the package manager for the installation. So we'll download the Office 365 apps location, and then we'll install the apps on the system. We'll get Google Chrome installed. We'll install Steam. We'll increase the page file to 8 gigs. I mean, realistically, you only really have to do this if you're running 4 gigs of memory. If not, then you should be fine just leaving it alone. But if you are running 4 gigs of memory, you could always increase it to 8 gigs, so we'll go through how to do that. We'll install OBS Studios, which is what I'm using currently to record this. Then we'll install OpenShot, which is what I use to actually make the videos, so to splice them together to create the videos. Again, these two things are open source, freeware on Linux. We'll install Discord, and then if you guys want to see the wiki, the information on these two things will be in the wiki. All right, so we're going to run the sudo commands. So we're going to do everything through the terminal. So we'll just open up the terminal. And with this, we can actually just grab these things, right-click and copy them. And then click somewhere in here and right-click and just do paste. And it'll paste the command directly in, so you don't have to write it line by line if you copy it directly and just paste it into a text file on your system. Again, you can just grab it off the wiki, paste it in there into a text file on your system, copy it off the text file and paste it directly in here, and we'll just hit enter. We're going to get a requirement for a password. Just put the password in and we'll hit enter. And that completes that command. Then we'll do the next command here. We'll paste. Hit enter. And once again, grab, copy, paste, hit enter. So once that finishes, we'll grab the next one, which is to install the Snap Store. So this installs Snap, which is the repository. This installs the Snap Store, which is the GUI, so you could actually see it through the start menu versus having to do everything command line. So we'll just hit enter. Now, I will say that generally speaking, even though I install the store, I almost never use it just because of the way the Snap configuration works. It's actually easier to just do the command line because it's literally just sudo snap install and then whatever the name of the application is, whether it's Discord or Teams or anything out there. You just type Steam, just type in the word and it does the install. So if you know what the application's called, it's just that easy. Again, everything's case sensitive, so everything should be lowercase, but otherwise, that's really about it. Okay, so we have Snap installed now, but Snap does require a reboot in order for us to see it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to type in reboot now, and we'll hit enter. Sorry, I have to type in sudo reboot now and hit enter, and the system will reboot itself, and once it comes back up, we'll log back in. We'll continue on through the list. Okay, so the system just came back up, and what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the Snap Store is installed. It's just actually called the App Store, but we can just do Snap, and we'll see it right here as App Center, and we'll just click on that, and there we go. Now we have all the snaps, so these are additional applications that are free of charge for you to download and install. So we can see featured, so we can see the VLC player. There's Vivaldi for a web browser. There's a bunch of stuff in here, and depending on, here's Chromium, there's Brave, Opera. So I mean, there's a ton of different things in here. It's all free. I mean, if you wanted to, you could go games, and you'll see a variety. There's Trackmania. There's Steam, if you want to download and install Steam. There's the Minecraft installer. So there's a bunch of stuff in here that you just get for free as long as you have the Snap Store installed. But that said, because of the way the snaps work, we don't necessarily need to use the Snap Store to install them because, again, if we just know what the application's name is, we could just do sudo app, or rather sudo snap install Slack. That'll install Slack. Now, if we want to remove it, it's just sudo snap remove Slack, and it'll remove it. And it's just that easy to install and uninstall when you're using the Snap repository. Now, if you don't know what the name of the Snap is, but you need to figure it out, it's really easy. You just go to snapcraft.io, which is the website. Specifically look for the Snap Store, and then you can do something like search for Firefox, for instance, and then I just click on Firefox. And in here, if I click on install, it'll tell me specifically what the command line is to install it, which means that you don't have to do the installation through the thing if you just do the search. So basically, you use a web page, you could find it. If you don't have the latest version, you just do the sudo apt-get update, and it'll update the Snap package configuration, which will give you the updates for the actual Snap. So basically, it allows you to then install it directly through the command line without having to install it through the GUI. So you don't necessarily have to install this last piece here. If you're smart enough to just go to the website, actually search, you could just copy that and paste it right in without having that installed. So if you're trying to reduce your footprint and keep your machine fast, there's no reason to really install that as long as you know how to use the web. Okay, so let's get some other stuff installed. So we have our Snap Store now installed. Let's install VLC player. So we'll just do sudo snap install VLC. Put our password in and hit enter. And there we go. We're downloading it, and it'll install it. Okay, so VLC is installed. So if I click on Start now and we go and we look for VLC, here we go, VLC Media Player. So that's installed. Let's install Teams for Linux. So this is just Microsoft Teams. It's just a port that was developed for Linux. So we paste that in. We'll hit Enter. And there we go. Now it's going to download and install Teams. Okay, so Teams is installed. Let's install Slack. So just hit Enter. It's going to download and install Slack. Now, again, you can go back into the Start menu after every one if you really want to and check them. So there's Teams for Linux. All you have to do is just type it in. It's just that simple. It'll find it directly into the actual Start menu. Now, if you decide that you don't want to type it in, you could figure out where all this stuff sits. I mean, you know, Internet, Teams for Linux. I'm guessing we're probably in video and sound. Yep, there's the VLC player for video and sound. And then I'm assuming that we'll probably also have Slack, yeah, right there for Internet. So it'll download these configurations or setups as we go down this list here and drop them directly into the correct location. Now you can move this stuff, or you can right-click on things if you wanted to. Like if I go to accessories, or rather Internet rather, and I want to put Teams for Linux, I could right-click and I could do Add to Panel, and it'll add it down here so it becomes a shortcut. So these are all options that you could do. Generally speaking, I just add the things that I use on a daily basis down here so I could just click them real quick. If not, then, you know, again, you can click the Start menu and go through and find them there, and eventually you get used to where they are, just like you did in Windows. So the next installation is a little different because it's a customized package. It doesn't exist in either of the App Store locations. So you're going to have to download it, which is this download link, which again will be in the wiki. So right now, if I go into the folder location and I specifically look for the downloads location, I could see that application that I downloaded. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to install it. So what we got to do is we got to change the directory to go there. Now, again, everything in Linux is case sensitive, so okay, so we're in the downloads location. I'll have to fix this because there is no // We're just doing CD downloads. And we're going to grab the actual package here to do the installation. So we're just going to sudo the installation. And we'll probably get prompted here that this is not a particularly good application. And the reason why is because it's not signed. It's an unsigned application. So now if we go in here and we search Office, we'll see that we have Microsoft Office installed. So this is not a direct installation, right? All this does is it really does a configuration that links this to your Office 365 account. So it will work. It's just not designed to be a installed local application. If you need that, you're going to need Wine. And I think the latest one that's supported on Linux is Microsoft Office 2016. So, you know, obviously it's not the newest one. If you need Office to actually just do Office local, just use the built-in Libre. It works totally fine. Just make sure you save it as a docx instead of the, I think, the ODT file or whatever it is that Linux uses as proprietary. As long as you save it as the docx or the XLSX for Excel, it works fine on Microsoft Office as well as Libre. Now, if you're doing customized Excel spreadsheet stuff, where you're going to use a lot of like macro things and configuration, then I would tell you to spin up a virtual system and install Microsoft Windows and install Office on that Windows thing and use that specifically for that. And then when you don't want it, just shut it off and you'll be back to your Linux system and work totally fine. Now, we already know that we can install Chrome through the Snap Store, but if you don't want to install it through that, you want to install it direct, you can literally just go to the Google website and click on Download Chrome. And then you'll specifically choose Deb for Debian or Ubuntu. And you'll see the 64-bit. You'll just set accept and install. And then once it's downloaded, you'll see it right here, right? So this is all it is. So we could actually just go show in folder. And there's Google Chrome. And we could choose open with the installer. And once the installer launches, we'll just click install package. We'll have to authenticate. And then this will install Chrome. Now, if we look back years ago, These sorts of configurations that are now simple really didn't exist in the Linux operating system. It's come a long way. And as a result, it really has become competitive to a Windows operating system, because there's enough functionality in the Linux OS at this point that the vast majority of people really don't need Windows anymore. They can really run Linux. Again, we're talking about something that runs on older hardware, that doesn't require the mainstream, like bleeding edge hardware. So, I mean, you don't need a 13th gen or a 14th gen processor to run this. It works totally fine on an 8th, 7th, 6th, or 5th gen. It's much faster, much smoother than a Windows 11 system is. And even on this configuration, which is 4 gigs and 2 cores, it's still snappy. And I'm still installing packages, just like I would if I was on physical hardware. Okay, so it's downloaded and it's installed. So now if I click on Start and I go to Internet, we should see Chrome in here, and there it is. So now we have an option to go to Google Chrome as well. So that's how we can install Chrome. Let's go back to our list here and see what else we got. So we did Teams for Linux, we have Slack, we have the makeshift Office 365 installed, we have Chrome installed. Let's install Steam. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to install the actual repository for Steam. And what that will do is it'll download and add a connection to the Steam location for updates. So basically to keep the application up to date and give you the ability to download and install your games. So we're going to do the sudo add apt repository multiverse, and we're going to just hit enter. So that's added. Then we're going to do another sudo apt get update. So I'm just going to type it because it's just easier. And we have to install Steam, so we're just going to do sudo apt get install Steam. Now it's going to prompt us and ask us whether or not we want to actually install Steam. Now if I did the -Y, it wouldn't prompt me, but since I didn't, I'm just going to hit Y and then hit enter. Okay, so Steam just finished installing. So if we go back again to the Start menu, check Internet, there's Steam. So at this point, if I click on this, it's going to download and continue the installation process. So we're going to choose on Install. And then much like Steam on Windows, it's going to look for updates available, and it'll download the latest update available for the Steam application on our Linux box. So there you go. Once that's finished, you can see you get the logon, and just like regular Steam on Windows, that's it. You just put your username or gamer tag or whatever in there and your password and hit sign in. It logs you right in, or you could use the QR code, which I obviously have hidden for obvious reasons on here. So that pretty much sums up Steam on our installation. Let's move on to the next package. So perhaps in the previous clip there, you noticed that we're running out of disk space, which obviously we installed Steam. Steam's huge. So we installed Steam, so we're probably going to uninstall Steam real quick, and then we'll continue on through the installation process. But at least now you can see how Steam installs. Okay, so the next thing we're going to install now is Discord. So we'll just do sudo snap install Discord, and we'll hit enter. And it's going to download and install Discord. And then obviously, if you want to install OpenShot or OBS, I don't think I have to run through this at this point. You've seen how we install the other applications. It's pretty much the same thing. The only thing is, like, again, OBS Studios and OpenShot is what I use to create these videos. So if you're looking to get into the YouTube game or anything else and you want to know how to do it but not spend a ton of money, OBS Studios is free, and so is OpenShot on Linux. You could use both of those, and they work fairly well. Obviously there are some bugs and some glitches, but, we're not talking $1,000 software. We're talking freeware. So I would check those things out if you are in the market for testing this out. So let me know down in the comments if you guys also want to know how to install VMware Workstation. I could throw that together also in a separate video because there's a little more involvement there. You're going to have to go to the website. You'll have to register. Once you're registered, you could get the files. Once you get the files, and we could do the installation and the configuration of the certificate if you have the encrypted home folder. And we could go through the whole process of that. I just need somebody to let me know down in the comments if you find that useful. I'll throw that together. But this kind of gives you an idea as to how this works, right? So it's pretty simple. And now that we have it installed, we could run this as a day-to-day driver for a desktop. I mean, again, we have Chrome, we have Firefox, we have Discord, we have Slack, Teams for Linux. We have all of the Office applications, the Microsoft Office application, the connections. We have, again, Teams for Linux for access. We have VLC player. We have a way to play videos that are built in if we need to. We can install additional codecs if we need to. The config is pretty simple. Now, I didn't go through the swap configuration only because I don't have an additional 4 gigs of free space. So the hard drive on this machine that I created for this VM for the purpose of this is only 20 gigs in drive space. So it's like XP standard size, right? Now, realistically, because of all the updates, the packages, if you're going to run Steam and everything else, I would say you need at minimum 50 gigs of drive space. Obviously, if you have more, better, but 50 gigs I would say is probably the minimum you want to run this on, just because you're going to need it if you want to have the additional storage for your games and everything else. So the one thing about this is that the swap file is dedicated, it's allocated, pre-allocated. So if you make it 8 gigs, you're 8 gigs lower of drive space. It's not like Windows, where Windows will say have an 8 gig page file, but it may only use 250 megs. So at 250 megs, that's what it uses. That's why when you run out of drive space on a Windows system, you blue screen to death, because the page file tries to increase. It doesn't have any drive space to increase, and then it has a memory error, and that's usually what generates your blue screen of death issues. Linux, that doesn't happen because, again, it's a flat file operating system, and everything's pre-allocated. So it's already got the dedicated storage location configured for the file. And that means that if it needs the full 8 gigs, it has the full 8 gigs. If it needs 1 gig, it has the 1 gig. But it has the full 8 gigs all the time, which really does help on the stability of the operating system. So let me know down in the comments, any of you guys willing to try it out? Run Linux Mint as your operating system to replace Windows 11 or Windows 10, rather than going to Windows 11, just save the money, run Linux Mint and run the operating system. Let me know what deters you from doing it, if there is anything out there that deters you from doing it. Let me know down in the comments. Also, Happy New Year, everybody, and Merry Christmas. I got really sick over the past couple of weeks. My wife has been sick since November, and we both have had like the flu and colds, and it's just been awful. So that's why I sound a little nasally here, so I apologize for that. Also apologize for not releasing any videos last week. My voice was just, I had no voice. So, I mean, outside of doing possibly sign language, which, not even jokingly, if I could figure out how to do that to cater to the people that, are hearing impaired, I would do that as well. Hopefully, again, everybody had a Happy New Year and a Merry Christmas. Hopefully you guys got some good toys or gifts. If you did, leave something in the comments. I'm curious what you guys got. Did you guys get anything good? Any hardware, any software, any games? Anybody playing anything? Any recommendations for anything out there? Let me know in the comments. All right, guys. Thanks for watching.